welcome. We'll be talking about Hypermedia APIs today and about using the Hypermedia as the engine of application state. I want to know if someone is familiar with the concept. Please raise your hands. It's not too many hands, actually, just a couple of hands, and someone is not really feeling comfortable pulling the hand up a little bit. Who has used it in practice for the applications? Okay, cool. So it will definitely be practical and useful for you, or at least will broaden your perspective. So on that moment, I want to say a couple of words about myself. I have already told you I have joined Wix a couple of 2 weeks ago, but that's not the only thing I'm doing right now. I'm also the financial partner for the startup Easy Hunt. This is a Swedish startup who is doing development in Ukraine, and we're creating a site for hunters. Another thing which I am deeply involved in is GEConf and XP Days. These are two big conferences in Ukraine. One is dedicated to agile practices, another one is about Java and Scala as well. We already have speakers for this event. For example, Maxim will be talking this May. And if there are good speakers in the audience, and I already know there are good speakers in the audience who want to promote Scala in the Java world, or just speak about Java, or just speak about system resilience and everything, you're welcome. Just contact me or contact Fear, and we'll make it happen to bring you to Ukraine. So for the last 10 years, I have been doing Java and different types of, working on different types of projects. And for the last 5 years, I've been deeply involved in building HTTP APIs and doing it properly in several companies. So Web HTTP API is like a simple thing, right? 2017, why are we still talking about this simple concept, how to use it? HTTP API, you have request, you have response, it's synchronous communication, client is initiating some request, server response, easy part. We'll now take a look at the Richardson maturity model for a second. Is anyone familiar with the concept of Richardson maturity model? 1, 2 persons are familiar with that. Basically, it's one of the ways to structure your, to understand how mature your API in terms of conformance to web. And the simplest you can get is basically RPC-like communication. So if you have RPC or you have SOAP, it's actually level 0. If you're adding resources, you are introducing URLs, and you have several of those, and you're mapping certain actions to different URLs, you're already doing level 1. And I think we at Wix, for the external part, are doing actual level 2, when we combine URLs and with HTTP methods, and then exposing that as an API. But that's not everything we can get. Today, I want us to look at the example of how level 2 API can look like. We'll advance it a little bit, and then we'll take a look at the hypermedia controls, like the prerequisite for this glory of REST in the API world. But I want the example to be something fun for us today. And what is going on funny in this world is actually this guy, okay? Everyone is talking about him. US is talking about them. Israel is talking about him. Ukraine is talking about him. Like almost every day we have some news. And what we'll be doing, we'll be creating a Trump feedback API. So imagine you just want to say whether you are comfortable with Trump or not comfortable with Trump, and express certain opinion and put a rating. And by the way, I have found out today that there's actually a site for that. Let's build an API. So how the feedback may look like? Like for example, Noah says it meets his expectations, and this dude really is making America great again, and not only America, and puts a rank of 10. Let's pretend 10 is the biggest rank here. But now there is Shai also, who is not that engaged into the politics of Trump and his approach, and he is expressing a little bit of different feedback. So let's take a look at the demo how the simplest API for this can look like. So I will go and open Postman. And in the Postman, I have, of course, a couple of requests over here. My major goal for today is so that you understand what's going on. So if something is not clear, break me up. I'll try to answer the question. If I'll be covering it later, I will tell you about that. Otherwise, we'll have some time after the presentation as well. So how do we actually post the review? So let's say we have reviews endpoint, and we just want to post a new review. So how should I post it? I say, okay, Netanyahu, for example, says, it's my boy, I've known Trump and his family for quite some time, and I put a good rating for him. So let's submit this request over here. So I send it, whoop, and I get the response. And the response is also very simple. I basically get back the very same details, but also an ID, which like says, okay, I have now assigned an ID to your resource representation. Now you can query me. How I can query this resource? Simple thing. I just say API reviews /ID of the resource, send the GET request, and get the response for that. Easy part. I can update the review by sending the patch. And for example, Netanyahu actually changed his mind. It says, no, Barack Obama was actually better than this guy. I changed my mind, put the ranking of 2. Most probably it won't happen, but he still has this opportunity with this API. And I can delete review and so on and so forth. So basic idea, this is a typical CRUD API. You create something, you get it, you can update it, you can delete it, you can also work with the list. Like, for example, you can get the list of all reviews. This is a list of randomly generated, 100 randomly generated reviews of people with Israeli names and some titles and comments. They are completely, completely random. I don't know. Something is going on here. No pagination, nothing fancy here, just some data. So what we have built so far with you, or I have just demonstrated to you, is a CRUD Style API. We have basically 2 types of resources here. The first type of the resource is a collection, which you can get and to which you can post something, basically create a new entity. And then you have a singleton or instance resources which you can update, delete, and do something with them. So this is a very simple concept. Who is familiar with this? I think everyone should raise his hands because, yeah, this is very basic, like CRUD Style API 101. No need to concentrate on this for a long time. But we all understand that applications are not that simple, right? Applications are actually much more complex and much more interesting. There is certain business process behind it. You cannot simply CRUD stuff. Let's make our application a little bit more enterprising. Let's say we create a review, so it's in the new state, and then you can update or delete it. So maybe you have a lot to say. It happens. With politics, there is always, you have a lot to say. And you create some draft, you then update it, maybe you change your mind, you completely delete your review, but at a certain point you say, okay, now I'm ready to submit it. So you submit the review, and it's passed to submitted state. Now, once it's submitted, someone has to review it and actually check if you're using the good words there, if whatever. So some asynchronous process happening. Think about TripAdvisor or Viator. They do the very same thing. You submit the review, and then they check if the review makes sense, if you're a valid user, if it's not a DDoS attack or something like that. And then once your review is reviewed, someone from the administration team just accepts it, or from the review team accepts it, and you have it in accepted state. This is a happy path, right? So it may be that your review will be declined, maybe something else will happen, but for now, let's keep it easy. The point here is that when you look, for example, at the submit action, it's already not a simple CRUD. First, you have to check if your status transition, if your state transition is valid. Then, if this check passes, you have to assign the submitted at time. Then you have to actually change the state. So here, the interesting part is that submitted at cannot be fulfilled by the client. It has to be done by the server. Now you see these three dots here. There is more actually happening in real-time applications. Like you have to send an email, maybe you have to post post something to the system and stuff like that. So usually you can the outcome here is very simple. CRUD is not enough. We need business-centric resources to fulfill actions like submission and acceptance. So that's why we'll make some API changes. The API changes will be really, really simple. So for our reviews, for each particular review, we will be able now to submit it. So we are creating it, updating it, and then we submit it. And once it's submitted, the review team can accept it by sending the push request to the acceptance resource. And afterwards, we can actually get the list of accepted reviews, because accepted reviews is exactly what the user should see at the very end. So how does it look like? Let me show you. We won't create the application right now. We'll just be reviewing what's in here already. So I have a put request here. Here you can see I'm using the put method because it's an idempotent unsafe action. And I have reviews 101 resource, but now there is a sub-resource which says submission, okay? Now when I hit submission, when I send a request over here, I can see that the status is actually changed to submitted, and the submitted at time has been changed, has been assigned. Now, the next thing I have to do, I have to accept the review, right? So now there is some asynchronous process going on. We are checking this stuff. We're checking if the review is fine or not. And then we, for example, at a certain stage, we say, I want to accept it. So for acceptance, I have a separate resource. This is called acceptance, named acceptance. And I use the very same method because, again, this is an unsafe but idempotent action. Is everyone familiar with the term idempotent and unsafe action? So if it's non-idempotent, we would use post. But if it's idempotent, we can actually use put. And I'm using put here. So idempotent. So idempotent means that it doesn't matter how many times you submit request, 1 or 10 times, the change on the server, the final state on the server will actually be the same. Like for example, if you have created something and then you deleted it, right? Whether you delete it 1 time or 10 times, it doesn't matter. The result on the server side will be the same. So you won't have a resource. Now, when you create something, submitting the very same data, for example, without unique constraints, for example, if you submit it twice, you will get 2 new records. If you submit it 3 times, you will have 3 records, and so on and so forth. So in HTTP world, post is for non-idempotent and unsafe actions by design. But you can use it for whatever you want, of course. You can use it to get stuff, to do everything, okay? So here I'm using acceptance because it doesn't matter how many times I accept the review. It will be accepted just once in the end. So take a look. The request has been processed, and now I have accepted at time set over here. And the status has also been changed to accepted. Now the last point. Nothing. It's an empty request body. We don't have to supply anything here. It's very simple. If I would like to update the record, for instance, like we did here, right? So then it would be a patch, and I would actually supply the body with the parts of the data that I want to get changed. Okay, so now the last part, which is missing, is getting the accepted reviews. So for that, like you like to say, zoom, zoom, zoom. I hope you see it well, right? Okay. So now the reviews search accepted. If I try to get those, I will see it here. That's take a look. This is an array, right? An array with the records. And so far, we have only 1, because all those 100 randomly generated Israeli reviews about Trump have not been accepted yet. They were just created. Again, who is familiar with this concept of creating APIs? Everyone. We are all doing this. This is also a simple 101 thingy. And 43% of all the APIs that build in this world are actually following this pattern. So it's not just CRUD. You're creating business-centric resources. You say, OK, now my business operation will be mapped to a new resource, and I will choose a method for it, and I will tell the world how to use it. So this is how the majority of APIs are built. And in the Richardson maturity model, we are actually very good in terms of like reaching level 2. But what about level 3? And before we talk about level 3, let's wait for a second and elaborate what is actually going wrong with level 2 API. What are the downsides of level 2 API? As this picture suggests, this API knows too much, or the client who is working with this API knows too much. And those who know too much sometimes can have troubles, okay? So the first problem is URI binding and construction. Now the clients, think about the JavaScript client, think about the mobile client for the very same application or for the very same API. Now all of those have to know the resource URLs they have to trigger and how to construct them. And they have to construct it properly. Like if I will just say reviews /reviews/plus ID variable, it doesn't mean I have constructed a valid URL, right? Because I have to properly escape it and stuff like that. I don't have to forget about this. There is even an RFC, probably you haven't heard, but there is even an RFC which says you won't be, clients should not be binding to URLs while working with the API. They may know about the entry point, but not about specific URLs and the namespace, the URL namespace of the server. But you're right, binding and construction is probably, I would say this is not necessarily a big issue unless you have to change it, right? And there are several URL change drivers that happen. One of the main change drivers probably is this famous picture, when you have a big monolith and you try to decouple it into many microservices. Not necessarily, but usually it leads to the change how you deploy stuff and how you map stuff, right? So when you decouple monolith into microservices, even if your URLs do not change, we'll have to put a lot of extra effort not to actually change them, right? Because we'll have to introduce all the mapping rules. Now we have to know that /something goes to that microservice and /something goes to that microservice. And usually people just break stuff at that point. There are also different deployment requirements. You have decided, or you were obliged to introduce a proxy. And for example, you cannot introduce it in a backwards compatible way in terms of API. Now URLs got changed. In my experience, names for the resources also change, and you want to rename the API. You want to optimize for, by client proximity, for example. So if I'm going to your API or to your site, for example, from US, I actually want to hit the US data center and not the European data center. One of the projects that I have been working on, we had multi-master configuration. So one was in EU, another one was in US. And we were actually on the very first request, you just went to the API and you could figure out, okay, now I'm actually going to the US or now I'm going to EU. And you as a client actually didn't bother, you didn't know about that. But we built Hypermedia for that. Here, the client has to know or client has to change. There are also caching, lots of other URL change drivers. But you know what? Probably this is also not the biggest concern with level 2 APIs. Your client still has to figure out the flow, right? Your client has, just think about it for a second. Now, when I want to issue a submission for my review, I, as a client, have to know that it must be in the state new. If it's in any other state, I shouldn't be enabling the submit button in the first place. If my review is in the submission state, I should be able only to accept it or to read it, but not any other action with it, right? But now, client has to know these details still. So I have to know, okay, if the status is this, I'm enabling this. If status is that, I'm enabling that. And imagine you have several clients, right? Now, all of those clients have to copy this logic into themselves, and this is actually an integration domain logic, right? This is not what you want to copy across the board. Now add security rules, okay? Now say, in addition to that, we also have to check the permissions, because this API that I am presenting to you right now, it actually is not working in the real world because it has to be secured. Only the reviewers have to be able to accept, right? Only I should be able to change my review and stuff like that. So when you add this up, and when you multiply it by the number of clients, and now what I like to say, if you're really successful as a platform, you are not controlling your clients. Like think not about Wix internals, for instance, but think about someone who is using your API from the outside. So you have exposed it for the use. And now all of those folks are actually also affected, or you are affected because you have to preserve this compatibility all the time. Now, how the success looks like, okay? Let's talk about how the success may look like, or one of the steps to get there. So just to be crystal clear, there are no silver bullets in this talk, and whatever I will be suggesting, it also has a certain downsides, and we'll actually not get to the end all this glory of REST, but I will talk to you about some concepts. So the solution here is to introduce hypermedia. We have data, right? We have data. This is the most precious thing that we have right now. So we have user, we have title, we have comment, we have rankings, and we have list of those. But now I am adding links, and I am communicating to the client that what kind of things he can do to the resource right now. So I can say, in order to trigger the submission, you should use this URL. In order to trigger the update, you should use this URL. In order to do the deletion, you should use this URL. But I'm also saying to him, this is only the pieces of, these are the actions, or these are the transitions that I support at this point in time. If the resource state will change, I will support different set of actions. How our Hypermedia API looks in this case. In this case, we just say certain actions. We say it's link relations, link names, and then we map them obviously to tasks, and there is a method to execute against them. So let's take a look how that works. Let's take an example. And for this example, I have, again, Trump feedback API, but Hypermedia style. Bless you. So we have, pay attention, there are only 3 endpoints over here that I have saved. Like not for every action, but only 3. You will understand now why. So I'm going to the index page. And on the index page, I see, okay, I have certain links, and one of those links is actually reviews. So I'll probably go and grab reviews. I just click the button as a normal dump user, and I have here the URL. I will just remove this part because it's not interesting. So I get, now I get the list of reviews. I have issued a simple get. I now see the list of those. But I don't want to, right now, what I'm interested in, I want to go over the whole happy path. I don't want to view the existing review. I want to create it and advance it across the state, okay? So I will create review in the very same way we have created it before. There is nothing different. Very same method, very same payload. So issue the request, I get the response, and now in my response I have to make it this way. And now in the response I actually see what I can do to this. I can just get the review by ID. I can update it, I can delete it, or I can submit it. For example, let me just click on the review once again on the link, get it, and I will see the very same representation. But this is not interesting. What's interesting is how I advance further. The way I advance further, for example, I want to trigger a submission. So I click the submission link. Now let's ask ourselves, when I do a submission, is it a safe action or unsafe? This is an unsafe action. So I will probably dump to post, put, or patch, right? Is it an idempotent or non-idempotent action? This is an idempotent action, so I should be actually using only put in this case, or hopefully put. I hit put, and I have got the transition. By sending the request, I have already got the transition, which tells me the only thing which you can do right now, effectively, in addition just to getting the review, is accepted. So I have the acceptance link. So I will click the acceptance link. With the acceptance link, it's the very same thing, right? It's unsafe, idempotent action. I send the request, and now I can do nothing with this review, according to my current flow. Maybe I will add something in the future, but the client won't be affected in this case. Maybe I want to actually allow changing the review already after submission or already after publication, and there is another process involved. Now I can effectively communicate this kind of changes to the client just by sending respective links in the response. Now, the last part which is missing, how to get the accepted reviews. So for that, I go to the index page. Whoop, I still have reviews. So I will go and navigate to the reviews part. In the reviews, I also have links, and there is a search over here. So I will go to search, click get. And then over here, I will see another link which says these are actually accepted. These are accepted reviews. Again, by clicking it and navigating, I can now see 2 records The first one, which we have accepted using the simple CRUD Style API, and second one, which we have like transition to the accepted state using Hypermedia API. Does it all make sense so far? Okay, cool. Very easy. Yes. So now what we have built here is a very simple hypermedia. We actually don't even know right now if it's a safe or unsafe action. We don't know the method. We don't know the payload, right? I have cheated a little bit because I have shown you an example that doesn't have any data associated with unsafe action, right? If you would ask me how you would do the update, actually for the update I would use the very same thing. It just I had to know what kind of data I had to submit in the update. And now comes the tricky part. You still have to know how to execute the action. Okay? You still have to know the associated data. The difference is in what you know, but let me show you this. Another example, booking. Here is what the non-hypermedia client has to know, right? It has to know all the transitions, all the rules, and all the data that is going back and forth. And this is what hypermedia client has to know. Still has to know actions. Still has to know data supplied to it. But it doesn't have to know when. And doesn't know where it resides. So this is already a win just by adding links. Not the full win. Yeah, you're still not there at the glory, right? You're still not there, but you are getting more decoupled with this way. So you feel there is no magic in here. You're just effectively attaching feature toggles, let's say resource feature toggles to your resource representations, and that way you are now able to change the location of the actions, and you can add them, and you can change the rules, right? And the client will adapt to them. For example, from the UI perspective, this is how it may look like. Like JavaScript can say, okay, if there's a submission link, then and only then I will draw a submission UI. And if you are a generic client, of course there are ways to actually work with this in a much better way. Let me show you. So the media type that I'm demonstrating to you right now, this is called Hypertext application language. And for Hypertext application language, there are two simple concepts. You take JSON as you have it, right? No strings attached. Just take JSON as you have it, and you can add links on top of it, and you can add embedded resources on top of it. Let me show you that. So let me show you that for example, for the reviews, for the simple API, this is how it looked like. Right? By the way, fierce feedback about Trump's behavior, let's say, right? And let's make another one. So this is a hypermedia enabled. Take a look. The content is approximately the same, right? Only the status, submitted that, and accepted that have been added in another version. But the major difference is the presence of links. Now, each resource can have a link. In addition to links, you can have embedded resources. So if I go to reviews, what is reviews? Reviews is a collection. So for the collection, you have its own data, like what's the size of the current page, how you have advanced in the overall iteration of this page. There are links, but there are also embedded resources. So you can actually attach resources right there in your representation. And it's hierarchical. That's what Hypertext application language does. Take JSON as you have it, add links if you want to, add embedded resources if you want to. You don't have to change the representation in a drastic manner. And that's why Hypertext application language is the most popular media type used for hypermedia right now. So just to recap, this is what I call simple hypermedia. This is purely my terminology. It says where to go and says when you can go, but it doesn't tell you how to do it still. It doesn't tell you that. There is no magic here. In 2014, there was a demand in hypermedia was greater than for SOAP or for CRUD style or URI style APIs. In 2015, it was even bigger for around 40%. I don't have data for 2016, unfortunately, but I think it's also approximately at that level. So people and companies are adding hypermedia APIs in addition to those CRUD Style APIs that we already have. And these are the companies which are doing it. So you may forget about all of this except of Amazon, GitHub, which we are also using, Amazon we are also using, and PayPal. These three companies are already doing Hypermedia for quite a while, and Amazon is using Hypertext application language specifically for the purposes of API gateway. Do you know the API gateway thingy by Amazon? So, anyone? It allows you to, yeah, so a couple of folks know about it. So you provide an API internally, then you can create a whole set of resources and methods and actually map it to the external world. And all this management thingy is also based around the API, and this API is based on Hypermedia. So according to Roy Fielding, who is the original REST, who is actually the inventor of REST, told that the real REST API should actually spend majority of time designing, like the design phase involves working on the media type, not on the data. Like we have to work on the data anyways, but what separates REST API from non-REST API is that you add this hypermedia links, relations, and the way you communicate state is different. So we have to know what kind of hypermedia capabilities our media type provides and does it fit our model or not. So let me give you an example of another, before structuring the information here, let me provide you another example of another media type, which is called Mason. So in Mason, in addition to data, you also have like controls, and now the controls are more interesting than hypertext application language controls, because you can say what kind of method you would like to use for triggering the operation. And then you can also use not only the method, but you can enumerate all the parameters that are required to submit that action. It's not needed always, but if you are creating a generic client that works with whatever application is out there, then this information will be important. So let's talk a little bit about Hypermedia Factors. So these are the level of hypermedia support that you can potentially get in the media type. First of all, there is Link Semantics. So we have introduced the notion of link. So what is a link? Link is, first of all, it has a name, and this name has to be unique. So in this case, we say there is a review, and we provide an href to the review resource. There are a couple of several link relations that are already registered, and you can use them right away. Like, for example, you can provide the link to the next page or to the previous page in the collection, to the first page or to the last page. Or you can provide the link to the resource itself, like, for example, self-link that we have already seen, and a couple of others. So before inventing your own link relation, think a little, look and think a little bit about if there is already an available one. Another example of link semantics is, for example, style sheets. So this is also the use of hypermedia, but in HTML. When you say, my link relation is actually a style sheet. It's not a JavaScript. It's not an SVG file. It's not something else. It's actually a style sheet. Now the browser knows, aha, this is a style sheet, and I have to render it and embed it appropriately. Another type of hypermedia factor is, and this is a very important one, outbound link. This is a normal link. This is the usual link just to another resource, right? So if you have, for example, an advertisement and the user who created this advertisement, from the advertisement to the user, you will have a link, because these are two separate resources. This is an outbound link. There is an embedded link. Embedded link is when you embed resources inside. In HTML, these are basically images, because you don't display images on a separate page, right? You say, I want to display them in place. And that's what you do with collection resources here, right? When you ask, give me a collection of reviews, you got the resource back, a collection, but there were embedded things in there. And this is another type of hypermedia factor, another type of hypermedia feature. There is an enormously important hypermedia factor which is called templated queries. This is the way to parameterize your request to the server in terms of the URL. So now you can say, I don't want to get a particular review. I want to search for review, for example, by ID. So you introduce a new link relation. You say, this is going to be review by ID. And then in here, in the URL, you actually say, there's a templated piece in here, which requires you to fill in an ID. And the link now says, OK, I'm templated. Please use me as a templated one. And now the beauty is, for example, if you have decided to change the ID not to be a pass segment, but a query parameter, for example, or a metrics parameter, you just change the template. And the client simply adheres to the template. The client doesn't have to necessarily change the code to trigger the very same action. OK. There is an RFC for templated queries, for templated URLs. And there are libraries which allow you to provide this templates, basically render the template or resolve the template into a valid href. So what you are saying, you are just providing the client the template. Client sees if it's a template URL or not. And if it's a templated one, you submit parameters and it will create an href for you. Again, there are many implementations already for Java, for JavaScript, for other languages. And this is a standard, so it's really, really encouraging to use this standard for providing templated URLs. There are also other hypermedia factors like non-idempotent updates or idempotent updates. The example that you see here is using hypermedia type, which is called SIREN, Structured Interface for Representing Entities. And in here you have fields. For instance, this is a creation of the review. This is our example with Trump API. So we create a review and we enumerate the fields which are needed. And we also say what kind of what type of fields are there. Again, let me stop for a second and emphasize, you do not always want this information to be so generic and dynamic, because you may be interested in creating a specific UI for a particular purpose. So again, some APIs need it. Many of the APIs do not need it. Many of the APIs just need the whole presence of the link and dynamic reaction to the link, but not necessarily dynamic relation to the data. So this is a very important thing to understand, that Hypermedia actually doesn't involve you, doesn't require you to go completely artificial intelligent and understand what's going on in this world. No, it just needs to, it adds you more dynamics into your world. There are non-idempotent updates. You can modify the method. You can say what kind of representation you want to get in the response. So there are many hypermedia factors. But now, why I was talking about this, because each hypermedia type supports certain subset of these factors. Now, JSON and XML support none out of the box. So there are no hypermedia factors in data formats, right? There are hypermedia factors in media types. So HTML has, and by the way, HTML is pretty solid. It doesn't allow you to do like LINCR hypermedia factors, but the rest is cool. That's why some people try to use it for APIs, but we all want to use JSON these days, or majority of us use JSON. That's why there is a whole lot of JSON-based media types for hypermedia. So I was showing you hell right now, concentrated on this one. Mason supports all the hypermedia factors. It's created purely by, well, basically most of the standards are created by one guy. It's not like many people working and thinking a lot about these problems. No, it's usually only one person. Like Mason is one guy from Netherlands, John Wild, who created it. Uber was created by Mike Amundsen, who is working a lot with hypermedia. By the way, Uber is not driving and taxi and stuff like that. Uber is just a hypermedia standard, no relation with a successful company that exists these days. But it's very generic. So the reason why I'm showing you this slide is when you start creating Hypermedia API, the next question, the major question that will pop up in your head is, what kind of media type should I use? Not which should I create, but which should I use? So this analysis that you see here, it was done by me back in 2014. The hypermedia scene hasn't changed much since then in terms of media types. So people try to use, either invent their own or use this hypermedia media types. And before choosing media type, we have to think about the tasks that we want to address by the API. We want to draw a state diagram and actually understand if we need this dynamic data model or not. We have to understand if it's enough for us just to introduce dynamic URLs or not. So that's where the practical game begins, and this is the most funny part. There are interesting media types. Let me talk a little bit about JSON-LD. So JSON, who's familiar with JSON-LD? So same folks are raising hands. So JSON-LD is like JSON for linking data, for linked data. And what it allows you to do, you expose payload, and you can now say what kind of, what each data piece actually mean, okay? So for example, for our review, we have user title, comment, and rank. And there are already predefined schema definitions for each of these terms. Like for example, for username, there is already a concept called name on the schema.org. So schema.org is the desire, I would say, a desire to collect information about different data, to consolidate it, and start using it for semantic web. And you can use it not only for semantic web, but for your own purposes. Like for example, when you receive a message in Gmail, and this message contains attached JSON-LD file, that's what some of the flight providers are doing. They attach a JSON-LD and they tell you, this information that I have supplied here, it's not just some plain vanilla JSON. It's a description of the flight. And there is a departure time, and there is a flight time, and there is like departure gate and stuff like that. And now Gmail can present it to you in a well-formed way in a special UI that says, okay, you're actually having a flight, and can send you the reminder. So certain flight providers are actually doing that in JSON-LD, and Google is promoting JSON-LD a lot in these days. And I was making this mapping yesterday in the evening, and I have actually found out each and every concept, 4 concepts here, are actually mapping to real things. So now it's not just rank, whatever rank, it's actually the rating value. So now you can group those, and you can say, this is a context. So you can name it, and when you give it to your customer, or to your API client, you say, this is my context, and he can read it and understand what that means. The downside of JSON-LD, it doesn't support any of the great modifications. So you can just read the data, but you cannot manipulate the resources. So for that, there is another thing, it's called Hydra. So it's an extension over JSON-LD that tells you now you can add supported operations and define your operations. So in this way, when you have a client, now client may understand, okay, now I can read the data, I can create those concepts, I can create and compose those concepts, but now I can also describe in what way I can change those. And now all these modifications can also give you the parameters and whatever you need to do this modification. So this is a really, really powerful media type when combined with Hydra. But of course, it all depends on your use case. Like for example, for applications, I'll go here a little bit. For applications that are set up to the customer, like for example, like a product, not something you see in the wild, but as a product. They do not use JSON-LD because there are some advanced things like being able to uniquely identify a resource globally. And you don't have that with those products because each customer has its own installation, and you are not controlling that. But if you have like a public site and you want others to understand what the semantics of your data is, you can do it via this approach. Now, this is another example using SIREN. Also, we have looked into this. I can maybe talk a little bit about link semantics. So when we create a link, it must be, as I have told you before, it must be globally unique. But simple names are actually already reserved. So you cannot use a simple name as a link. You have to use a URL. But using URLs for a link is not very convenient, right? So if I would, for every link, I would create a new href, my payload would be really, really tricky. So the way around that is actually introduce so-called namespace. So you introduce a namespace and you say, my namespace is called Trump feedback, and the link is called review. So now, imagine, so you're giving a context, and now only this part here, Trump feedback, this is the part which actually needs a URL. But now think about it. Having one URL for the whole namespace is great, because now on that URL, you can have documentation, right? And now on that URL, if that's a page, you can actually say, now I can add a hash to that page, and after that hash, I can add the link, and I will see the documentation on what kind of operation that is. Let me show you how that works. So this is a real example. I will probably close this application over here. Yep, and I will have to trigger another one. So in Ukraine, I'm giving a talk about black market, because black market in Ukraine is huge when it comes to currency, right? In here, it's not applicable, so I'm not doing a black market talk. We're doing a Trump talk here. Nevertheless, the concept is simple. So again, I open up the Hell browser. The Hell browser has advertisements over here. By the way, let me create one new advertisement so that you can, so that it's easy for you to grasp what's going on. So I just create a new resource. Don't think about what kind of resource that is. This is just an advertisement. And for that advertisement, let's find it. So I will go and get it. I want to sort by ID in descending order. So I sort by ID in descending order. I find the first one. This is the one I have created right now. I will go and get it. But now take a look. So I have got the resource and I can publish it. And HAL browser, the standard tool for hypertext application language, knows that black market is actually a namespace. And this namespace is mapped to this URL. Take a look at the URL, localhost 8080 docs API guide.html and then rel. So now, if I will replace the rel with, for example, publishing, I would like to see documentation for publishing. So take a look what happens. Boop, I click the link here. And in the inspector screen, I actually have the page which tells me how should I publish and add. And it has a curl request, it has a HTTP request, it has a response, and stuff like that. And when you combine, so now what we have done so far, we have said these are our relations. We have said these relations have some real representation in form of documentation. We have made them unique. We have referenced the docs. And now, by using the standard tool, we know how to work with the API. Knowing nothing right now except of how to authenticate into the service, I can actually discover the API, and I can start working with it. And I combine it with human-readable documentation, which a good developer should provide anyways, right? And with that, I can actually do the publishing. So, and the publishing here is very simple. It's also a simple put request. It's going to be put request without any specifics. And whoop, I have made the transition now. I cannot publish. I can only expire. So stuff like that. Yep.
In this example, what you have here is you only discover the expiration resource or action after you publish it.
Exactly.
As the client, but when I build the client UI, I need to know all possible states along the way.
Exactly. Very good question. So the question is about how should I, when I can only figure out the state as a developer. Here's how the question goes. As a client developer, I want to know all the states beforehand in order to be able to react to them. Exactly. You have to know the states and how to transition and how to make transitions in this particular API. What you don't have to know is when they appear and where you should go to actually initiate them. So you build the API you build your UI in the very same way. It just you pretend that the links and the transitions can be dynamic. So now you don't enable the button all the time, or you have to enable the button when the state is publishing. But you say when the current representation told me I support publishing, you enable the publishing button, and then the rest of the magic happens.
How do I know there's even a publishing button? That's my question. When I come to build my application,
yeah.
is there metadata?
Yeah. So it's a very good question as well. This is already beyond the use of this hypermedia media type. You can use that by having a profile. So this is our next and last topic for today, actually. you can use the profile. For example, I know Wix engineering doesn't like Spring and stuff like that. I'm using actually Spring for this application. Okay, so because it would be very easy to show you all of the things. Yeah. So you have a profile, and in the profile, for instance, I can go again. This is the link to the profile is visible in the entry point. So from the API developer perspective, I just go here. Okay, I have the browser tool. But anyways, I have a profile. So I get the profile. In the profile, there are ads. So I go to ads. And here I have the description on what kind of representations are there. What do they mean if they are semantic, or what values do they have? What kind of documentation associated with them do they have? What kind of safe and unsafe actions are supported in general, but without URLs, of course. You just know what you can do. What kind of projections of data you have. Like one resource may have several projections or even be dynamic, right? You can say, I want this set of properties or this set of properties, not necessarily one set of properties all the time. So this description over here, which is using ELP's profile, is giving you that information. But it's all based on discovery. So I'm not saying that you can completely avoid documentation. For the applications that we are building, that all of us are building, unless we're doing generic client and generic API, we need documentation prepared by the developers and consumed by client developers. The issue that we are trying to address here is decoupling between the client and server. So now when you know and understand the concept, you can actually say, okay, now this is the way I'm going to decouple it. And I still know about the data, yes. And data changes have still to be backwards compatible, yes. And I cannot still just change the URL and everything stops working. You can't, because there are clients who have cached the URLs already, and you have to maintain them for some time. But if you have provided Hypermedia API, this won't be a long time. And now your monitoring metrics will actually show you if someone is using that or not. All those concerns are still in place, but the coupling is much better. Okay, so with that, couple words on documentation. So ideally, the documentation looks like you have an entry point, and from that entry point, you do not provide URLs to any other actions. You just say, this is the entry point, these are the links that are supported, these are the actions that are supported, and this is how data looks like. This is what your documentation is about. And yeah, profiles we have covered. I think that's where we are with the Hypermedia controls and the glory of REST. And Trump says, that's fine. So thank you for listening. One more thing. So small advertisement again. So GEConf is coming this May. This is the biggest conference in Eastern Europe. I'm one of the members of program committee, and if you want to talk on our event, you are highly welcome. I want to tell you that we're not necessarily looking for stars. We're looking for people who have practical experience, in-depth understanding of certain practical concepts, and want to share that with the world and with the engineering community. So like the talk that we had an awesome talk before this one about performance and resiliency from Avishai and about the queues. So talks like that are very, very welcome on our event, and we would be glad if you can join. We'll help you with the slides and everything. And we'll also be happy to see you in Kiev, because I will be taking care of events in the Kiev office, and to speak up there would also be good. Again, thank you for listening. It was my pleasure, and have a good day.